Hey, what's going on, everybody? It is Dean Meadows for another episode of Dean's Dialogue in association with The Daily Apologist. Today is probably my favorite day when I get to do these podcasts because I love Fridays. It's Free for All Friday, and boy, do we have a doozy for you today. For those of you who may not know, Free for All Friday is just me doing some commentary on the things that I have seen, I've watched, I've read, maybe even experienced, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And this is going to be a good one. It won't disappoint. So recently, this week, I did a blog on a statement made by Matt Dillahunty during his debate with Blake Giunta, and he stated in this debate called "Is Faith Rational?" He said, "Science doesn't appeal to faith." Now, that might be true, but often it's stated that scientists don't appeal to faith. And basically, long story short, I wrote a blog about faith being used or faith being appealed to in believing that there's this thing called the multiverse, right? And so the next thing that I know, I've got PineCreek, who has a YouTube channel out. His name is Doug, and Cam Spires asking questions on my wall. Forrest Antimosaurus, who's a part of the Daily Apologist, is on my wall talking. And wouldn't you know it, the whole conversation goes from the multiverse to, a conversation about the Kalam cosmological argument. I didn't know what was necessarily going on. I just don't know how this works with me. Sometimes I just run into it. Now, there was a lot of stuff said about the Kalam that I'd like to address, and so, because there's just so much on the wall that I couldn't really get to. I asked Doug if he wanted to do a live video on it. He said no. So I think the best way to address Doug's argument is to kind of dissect it here. So here's what he asks me on the wall. He asked me, "Can you give me 3 examples of something beginning to exist?" And so I responded with wallets, planets, and desks. And then he comes back and he asked me of those. He asked if those things come from nothing. Now, here, Doug and I completely and totally agree. We both agree that something cannot come from nothing. But then, I think in his assessment of the Kalam, PineCreek takes a turn for the worst. He says, "You see, Dean, premise 1 of the Kalam uses evidence for things that you mentioned, wallets, planets, desks. They begin to exist from other stuff. So with premise 2, the universe began to exist, one should remain consistent and say that the universe began to exist from other stuff. But proponents of the Kalam say, no, the universe didn't begin to exist from stuff. But now, we no longer can tie premise 1 to premise 2. Does that make sense?" Now, to the unsuspecting Christian, this seems, what Doug is saying, seems to make sense. But the Kalam is merely seeking to establish, and this is, I think, where Doug's off, is that it is merely seeking to establish that the universe has a cause, and it never names the cause. Aristotle classically identifies at least 4 types of causes: material, formal, efficient, and final. Now, the Kalam doesn't commit to or imply any of these causes specifically. It only argues that the universe must have a cause. There is nothing in the first 2 premises of the Kalam that moves to either side of this metaphysical spectrum, right? Now, what Doug is doing, who's also known as PineCreek, what he is doing is he's begging the question where the Kalam doesn't. He thinks that premise 2 should state the universe began to exist from pre-existing stuff. Well, I mean, the whole nature of the Kalam is to just state that there is a cause. By adding stuff, right, Doug has inserted and exposed his a priori bias towards naturalism. He's trying to smuggle in naturalism into the premise. The very question is, what is the cause? And so to argue that the cause is always physical is once again to beg the question. If Doug means to suggest that his mind is closed to any other possibility, then he is the one who needs to rethink his belief. And that's a devastating mistake to make. So like later on, Forrest Amatosaurus, who's a member here at the Daily Apologist, he asks Doug, so the universe came into existence by pre-existing stuff. That pre-existing stuff came into existence by pre-existing stuff forever. And then Doug states, I don't know. It could be the case. We don't know. Forrest responds with, so an infinite regress of pre-existing stuff is possible. Doug then says, I don't know, but it could be. Regressing a circle, a certain point on the circumference of a circle can go on infinitely. Now, there is much to unpack here. First, Forrest does an excellent job in pressing Doug on his pre-existing stuff argument. Doug is hesitant but has to commit, even subtly, to the infinite regress, because if he doesn't, he's destroyed his whole argument. So let's address PineCreek's subtle appeal to an infinite regress of pre-existing stuff. Doug may be unaware of the difference between an actual infinite and a potential infinite. First, an actual infinite number of things absolutely cannot exist. An actual infinite is a collection of definite and discrete members whose number is greater than any natural number, while a potential infinite is a collection that is increasing towards infinity as a limit, but never actually get there. So, for example, a finite distance can potentially be divided an infinite number of times. All you have to do is keep dividing parts half over half. But here's the thing, you will never arrive at an actual infinitieth division. So the first line of reasoning in the Kalam doesn't assert that potential infinites cannot exist, but that an actual infinite number of things cannot exist. David Hilbert, probably the best mathematician of the 20th century, stated, the infinite is nowhere to be found in reality. All in all, an actual infinite number of things, if it were real, would have counterintuitive absurdities attached to it. So, for example, let's take the place where you work, or where you go to school, or even where you live. Let's say you had an infinite number of chairs there, and then you took 5 trillion chairs from the place where you live, where you work, or where you go to school. How many chairs would you have? Well, infinity subtract 5 trillion is infinity, right? But what if you added 20 trillion chairs? How many chairs would you have? 20 trillion plus infinity is once again infinity. So no matter what you add or what you subtract, you still get the same number. But that simply, this illustration would not actually work in the real world. So we can conceive of infinity, we can think about infinity, but it's never, what I like to say, transported into the actual world in which we live. And that's really the mistake that Doug makes in saying, well, we could possibly be doing this. And so Um, let's take PineCreek's subtle assertion that there is an infinite regress of pre-existing stuff. Now, we've just said that it can't exist, but let's think about it if it were true. If it were actually true that we live or the universe is just an infinite regress of pre-existing stuff, what would that mean? And here's the question that we would want to ask. How would we ever arrive at today? It seems that pre-existing stuff would beget pre-existing stuff, which would beget pre-existing stuff. And if there's always pre-existing stuff before the universe, then there is no point in which the universe could ever come into existence. But the universe clearly has come into existence, which means there isn't an infinite regress of pre-existing stuff. Our universe has come into being at a finite point in the past. And so what the Kalam is trying to say is that there must be a first cause of the universe. And that's the whole point. And so in talking about some of the things that Doug has talked about, the pre-existing stuff and begging the question, what Doug has really done is he's drilled a hole in his own argument. He's really done a lot of damage to naturalism, and I think that on the basis of the Kalam, actually what Doug has done, maybe not intentionally, is actually through begging the question and through asserting this idea of pre-existing stuff begetting pre-existing stuff, for infinity. He's actually shown the strength of the Kalam, and so just remember that's just something that was noted earlier this week that I thought it would be really interesting to share. And so for those of you who want to look more into the Kalam, I would go to reasonablefaith.org. William Lane Craig, who's the philosopher who's really made that famous, gives multiple arguments for it. I would also get, if you're a college student, I would get On Guard. He talks about that there. Or next week, if you check out the website, there'll be a series that I'm doing of blogs on the Kalam, so check that out. So, hey guys, once again, greatly appreciate you being here with us. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for watching the videos. Thank you so much for sharing and liking the blogs. Thank you so much for your prayers, your love, and your support. It means so much to us because this is the stuff that we come in contact with day in and day out. And our mission is to equip Christians so that when they do come across people like Doug, a.k.a. PineCreek, who's a very smart, who's a very clever guy, they know how to address some of the things that he and others like him address, because we're in the business of equipping Christians to engage culture. Have a great Friday. God bless. This is Dean Meadows signing off.